In 2012, a Swedish documentary filmmaker interviewed survivors of the sterilization program. She contacted 30 people. Only 3 agreed to speak. One was the woman from the care home in Malmö. They sat in a small room with pale blue walls. The woman spoke slowly, as if each word required effort. She did not cry. She simply described what happened: the waiting room, the paper, the emptiness that never left. When asked why she agreed to the interview, the woman said, "Because I want people to know it was real, that we were real." The documentary was completed in 2014. 14 people attended its premiere. The woman from Malmö had died 3 weeks before. The film is now online. It has been viewed 1,342 times. Truth, it seems, is not always popular. The teacher who noticed the bruises wrote a memoir. She included a chapter about the child and the school board's decision not to act. The memoir sold 320 copies. One was bought by the woman in Oslo. She recognized herself in the story. She wrote a letter to the teacher thanking her. The letter was never sent. It is still in a drawer in her apartment. The Chilean refugee's daughter continued to share her father's story. She posted it on forums, sent it to journalists, submitted it to human rights organizations. She received polite responses, expressions of sympathy, but no action, no investigation. She stopped trying in 2019, not because she stopped caring, but because she realized that some truths are not meant to be heard. The hemophiliac support group disbanded in 2015. Most members had died. One survivor gave an interview in 2018. He was asked if he had found peace. He said, "Peace is not the right word. I have found acceptance." But acceptance is not the same as closure. The woman who searched for her adoption records died in 2020. Her daughter found her research materials, folders full of letters, legal documents, and handwritten notes. She considered continuing the search. But after reading through the files, she decided not to. She understood her mother had not been searching for answers. She had been searching for recognition, for proof that her loss mattered. The activist group that tried to reconstruct the destroyed case files eventually gave up. They compiled over 300 individual cases. They identified patterns of neglect, abuse, and cover-up. They presented their findings to a parliamentary committee. The committee thanked them for their work, and then they filed it away. The group dissolved 6 months later. The 8th moment remains a rumor, a story whispered but never printed. But the silence around it is documented, in retracted articles, in closed investigations, in the absence of follow-up. And that silence, more than any accusation, suggests something happened that powerful people did not want examined. The man by Lake Vänern turns and begins walking back. The snow crunches under his boots. The sky is darkening. Soon it will be night. He thinks about the stories he has heard, the ones never confirmed, the ones dismissed, the ones forgotten. He wonders if they are true. He wonders if it matters. Because truth is not just about facts. It is about who is allowed to speak, who is believed, who is remembered. These 8 moments are not the whole story of Sweden. They are not even the darkest chapters, but they are part of the truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, deserves to be spoken. Because the alternative is not peace. It is only the illusion of peace. And illusions, like ice, eventually crack. The woman in Malmö is gone. The journalist is gone. The refugees, the patients, the children, most are gone. But their stories remain, not in textbooks, not in official records, but in the spaces between words, in the pauses, in the things that were never said. And perhaps that is enough. Not justice, not closure, but memory, because memory, unlike silence, cannot be erased. It can only be ignored, and ignoring it is a choice. There is a building in Stockholm. It is not marked. It has no plaque, no sign, no indication of what it once was. But those who know, know. It was once a place where decisions were made, where files were kept, where silence was enforced. The building still stands. It has been renovated. It now houses offices for a tech company. Young people work there, unaware of the history beneath their feet. And perhaps that is the point. To move forward, a society must sometimes forget, or at least it must pretend to. But forgetting is not the same as healing, and silence is not the same as peace. The woman who was sterilized in 1951 is still alive. She is 96 years old now. She lives in a care home near Malmö. She does not speak much anymore, but sometimes, late at night, she sits by the window and looks out at the snow, and she thinks of the son she never raised. In 1999, the Swedish government formally apologized for the sterilization program. They offered financial compensation to survivors, but the apology came too late for many. Thousands had already died, and those who remained were left with a payment that could never restore what had been taken. The journalist who tried to publish the story about psychiatric abuse never wrote again. He became a teacher. He told his students that the most important stories are often the ones that never get told. He died in 2003. His folder was never found. The child with the bruises grew up and moved to Oslo. She changed her name. She built a life that had nothing to do with the town she came from. She rarely thinks about her childhood, but when she does, she remembers the teacher who noticed, and she wonders why no one helped. The Chilean refugee lived in Sweden for 30 years. He worked in a factory. He raised a family. He never spoke about what happened to him. But his daughter found his letter. Years after he died, she published it online. It was read by 17 people. No one from the government responded. The hemophiliac patients who contracted HIV formed a support group. They met once a month in Uppsala. They shared their stories. They comforted each other. But they did not seek justice. They had learned that justice and truth are not the same thing. The woman who was denied access to her adoption records never stopped searching. She hired investigators. She submitted requests. She spent thousands of kroner and years of her life. She found nothing. The system was designed to protect privacy, but it also protected secrecy. The destroyed case files were never recovered. A small activist group tried to reconstruct them from newspaper clippings and testimonies. They pieced together fragments. But fragments are not evidence, and without evidence, there can be no accountability. The eighth moment remains unresolved. Some say it was exaggerated. Others say it was real but misunderstood. A few insist it was true and that the silence proves it. But silence proves nothing. Silence is only absence. And yet, absence can be louder than any confession. There is a theory in Scandinavian culture called janteloven, the law of Jante. It is an unspoken rule that discourages individual distinction. It says, do not think you are special. Do not think you are better. It is often framed as humility, as equality, but it can also enforce conformity. It can discourage questions. It can silence dissent. Sweden is not unique in this. Every country has its silences. Every nation has its buried stories. But Sweden's silence is distinct because it exists within a framework of transparency. Sweden ranks among the most democratic, most equal, most progressive nations in the world. And that makes the silence more painful. The man walking by Lake Vänern reaches the end of the shore. He stops. He looks out at the water. The ice is thick, but not solid. There are places where it is weak, places where, if you step wrong, you will fall through. Everyone who lives here knows this, and so they walk carefully. They test the ice before they step. But sometimes, the weak spots are not visible. Sometimes, the ice looks solid until it breaks. And when it does, the cold water beneath is silent. It does not explain. It does not apologize. It simply swallows. The wind moves across the frozen surface of Lake Vänern. It is February, and the sky holds no color. Only gray, only cold. A man walks along the shore, his boots leaving shallow prints in the snow. He does not look back. Sweden is a country built on trust, on order, on the belief that what is spoken is true and what is unspoken does not exist. But silence, like ice, can cover many things. And beneath the surface there are cracks. This is a story about 8 moments, 8 fragments of history that were hidden, dismissed, or quietly erased, not with violence, but with silence. The first moment begins in 1951. A hospital in Uppsala. A young woman sits in a waiting room, her hands folded in her lap. She is 23 years old. She has been told she is unfit to raise a child. She does not argue. She signs the paper, and her son is taken. Between 1935 and 1976, Sweden sterilized over 63,000 people. Most were women. Many were poor. Some were considered mentally ill. The state called it progress. The victims called it nothing, because no one asked them. The woman will live another 40 years, but she will never speak of this day. The second moment comes in 1962. A journalist in Stockholm receives a folder. Inside are photographs, documents, evidence of systematic abuse in state-run psychiatric facilities, patients strapped to beds for weeks, drugged without consent, beaten in the name of order. He writes the story. He submits it to his editor. The editor places it in a drawer. It will not be published. Not because it is untrue, but because it is inconvenient. Sweden is admired across the world. To publish this story would shatter that image. The journalist resigns 3 months later. The folder is never seen again. The third moment is quieter. A teacher in a small town near the Norwegian border notices bruises on a child's arms. She asks questions. The child does not answer. She reports it to the school board. They decide not to intervene. The family is respected. To accuse them would cause trouble. The child grows up. The bruises fade, but the silence does not. The fourth moment is national. It is 1973. Refugees flee to Sweden hoping for safety. But documents later reveal that Swedish authorities collaborated with foreign intelligence agencies to monitor and deport political dissidents. Men and women who had fled torture were sent back to the countries that wanted them dead. A Chilean refugee writes a letter to a newspaper in 1978. He describes how he was interrogated by men who knew details only his own government could have known. The letter is published on page 12. No investigation follows. The fifth moment is medical. In the 1980s, Swedish health authorities become aware of contaminated blood products being distributed to hemophiliac patients. The products carry HIV. Warnings are delayed. Patients are not informed in time. Some die. When the truth emerges, there are apologies, committee hearings, promises. But no one is prosecuted. The families are offered compensation, but not accountability. The sixth moment is intimate. A woman in her 60s sits in a government office in Gothenburg. She has come to request access to her adoption records. She was adopted in 1959. She has always wondered about her birth mother. The official tells her the records are sealed, that some things are better left unknown. She leaves with nothing. She will die without ever knowing her mother's name. The seventh moment is bureaucratic. In the 1990s, a government audit reveals that thousands of child welfare case files have been destroyed. Not accidentally, but as part of a scheduled purge. The files contained evidence of mistreatment and the names of those responsible. The destruction is legal. It follows protocol, but it ensures no one can be held accountable. The eighth moment is recent. It involves powerful people. Accusations, investigations that were opened and then quietly closed. Details reported and then retracted. Names spoken and then forgotten. No charges were filed. No trials were held. But the silence was loud, and those who tried to speak found themselves isolated, discredited, or simply ignored.